Hi, everybody. We'll get started in just a few moments. But first, let me tell you about custom content. Picture this, your vision perfectly captured with stunning images or videos made just for you. At Getty Images, we've got over 550,000 creators worldwide, bringing fresh, authentic, and diverse perspectives to life, tapping into the latest VisualGPS data-backed insights and our decades of expertise to help guide them. That's why some of the biggest brands in the world trust us to enhance their visual stories. Whether it's for social, digital, video, and beyond, we deliver content that's on brand, on budget, and 100% yours to own. So you don't just have to picture it. From concept to creation, we can make it happen. Reach out to your Getty Images representative to execute your vision with custom content. Or scan the QR code and complete the Contact Me form. All right, folks, Season 6 of The Download starts now. Hi, I'm Jennifer Kelly, Senior Customer Success Manager here at Getty Images, welcoming you to the download presented by Getty Images. Today is Thursday, January 15th, 2026. Yes, and it is 11:02 Eastern on the East Coast of the United States of America. However, we are coming to you live from locations all across the globe. As always, I want to give a special shout out to all of our current customers and thank you for your business. We truly, truly appreciate it. Don't forget to drop your questions in the Q&A below on Zoom or in the chat if you're joining us today on LinkedIn. We'll answer them later in our live Q&A session. All right, enough with the housekeeping. Today, we're going to dive into some of the creative trends our visual GPS experts are tracking for 2026. Here to kick things off is Senior Vice President of Creative, Dr. Rebecca Swift. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Jen.
Thanks so much.
I'm just so keen.
First. I am so excited to see what you all have in store for us for 2026, so I'll let you take the floor.
Thanks, Jen. And hello, and thank you everybody for joining us today. It's the second session that we've done, which is a roundup of the year. We did something very, very similar this time last year, and it was so popular we thought we'd come back and do it again this year. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the three major themes that we identified in 2025, and talk about how we expect them to evolve further in 2026. As you are probably well aware at this point, we run a research project called VisualGPS. It's the research that sits behind all of the content that we make at Getty Images, and the team that I have invited along to join me on the stage today is the team that runs those projects. So I'll introduce everybody now. We have Jacqueline Burke, who is the head of creative insights for EMEA, so that's Europe, the Middle East and Africa. And joining her today for the first time is Rebecca Lewis, Bex to us, who runs the curation for the same region. In EMEA, so in North and South America, we have Tristan Norman, who again joined me last year. And in addition, we have Beth Wattell, who runs curation for the region. And finally, and definitely not last but not least, is Kate Rourke, who runs insights for the APAC region, and Fiona Kwa, who runs curation. So we are a band of merry women here today, and we're going to talk about not only the themes and the trends that we have identified, but also we're going to talk about some of the content that we have curated and created here at Getty Images. So without further ado, let's just get in there. So the first topic, which is probably no surprise to anybody on this call, is AI. And we talked about AI last year, and a lot happened in the world of AI through 2025. But from a visual content point of view, we have obviously been tracking how our customers and the world at large has been visually representing AI as a concept and as an entity. And mainly that's why our customers come to us. They're looking for content to talk about AI, talk about how AI is being adapted or adopted by their business, or talking about AI in the abstract. It's again probably no surprise that AI is the top searched keyword of 2025. But the really interesting thing is, even though it has been with us for a couple of years now, the visual icons around AI are still pretty rudimentary. We're still seeing a lot of digital overlays. We're still seeing a lot of images that literally have the word AI in them. Still seeing a lot of white robots, and we're seeing a lot of robot hands and working on computers. So, there is a lot of very generic imagery around that kind of all looks the same, but it's very much serving the purpose of a signpost to AI. And we expect that to obviously to continue into probably into next year as well. For those of you that were with us last year, we were talking about the kind of the rise of hands and hand models as a result of the interest in AI, and AI generative models famously are not great at creating hands. Even though we've been through many different models and many different iterations, there's still hands are still a sticking point for AI models. So as a kind of contrast to that, we're seeing photographically and on film that our clients, our customers are using hands, really focusing in on using hands to talk about humans in their everyday lives. And when we had this conversation last year, we were talking about hands in business. The evolution that we saw in 2025 was towards using hands in all sorts of scenarios around our lives and our everydays. And I think that's really interesting. And we expect that to continue to develop in the future. So I think probably is now a good time actually for me to bring in one of the others to talk to how we expect this imagery to evolve further in 2026. I'm kind of giving you a little bit of an insight as to where we have seen it come from. Kate, I know we've been talking about this recently. Maybe you can talk about how you've been seeing AI imagery in your region.
Yeah, so I might do a little bit of a look back too, Rebecca, just because I think it sort of sets the scene for what we are expecting to evolve for 2026. So just like what you were saying for the globe, we too in Asia Pacific have seen AI being our top search term, and it has been pretty much for 2 years on the trot. And I actually looked at it in preparation for this for the webinar, and it still is. But I think what's interesting is that it hasn't just been searches that we saw in 2025 continually be really high for AI, but also the actual visuals themselves. So we actually saw a 30% increase on visuals on that theme of AI from 2024 to 2025. And to what Rebecca, you were saying, how some of the things that we were anticipating or predicting for 2025. One of the things that many of you will remember if you were on the download and watching us last year was we were very much going to see that human and AI collaboration. Well, that very much materialized. But in Asia Pacific specifically, what we saw was that very much happening in a business setting. So whereas within a lifestyle setting, we actually saw that decline. Now, I think a lot of that was driven by a reflection of what was happening culturally, and particularly in Asia Pacific. So if we take markets like China, South Korea, Southeast Asia, they were very much amplifying a narrative of this AI-powered prosperity. So very much driven by governments and a lot of the business leaders. But what we started to see, Rebecca, was this visual language of really showing AI as this enabler of economic growth and innovation. But what I will say is again, a lot of the visuals that we're seeing, they tend to lean much more into that futuristic side of that business setting, very much those electric blues, the magentas, those lovely digital overlays that you mentioned, but firmly in that business way. Interestingly, though, there is obviously that other conversation that we all know that we've been discussing a lot as a team, and equally from our own research that we've been carrying out, that more on an individual level, there is a really strong concern and significant conversation around data security, privacy, job displacement, but more specifically, that polarizing debate that we have around what's real and what's fake, particularly when it comes to Gen AI and human-made content. And what was interesting is as we were carrying out a lot of the visual analysis, something that we started to see a lot more in 2025 was actually a lot of businesses were sort of jumping on that cultural tension that was happening and showing literally like a robot hand with those blocks demonstrating that difference between what's real and what's fake. So really trying to talk to that conversation quite literally. We also saw, of course, a lot of brands experimenting with those generative AI models and AI influencers. But the challenge with that was that many people were mistaking them to be real. And so this particular tension that we're seeing saw it already in 2025. Definitely, we expect that to continue into 2026. So, and really getting probably a lot louder. So on the one hand, we've got that AI human collaboration. Visuals will absolutely, in that, if you like, within AI and human collaboration, we expect that to really remain central. But equally, we've got that sheer volume of low quality, homogeneous AI slop, which is actually driving demand for much more around that human craft. So, we know through our own VisualGPS research, really clearly audiences are saying that they really value much more originality, creativity, and that craft that we get through human-made visuals. So to get there, finally, I'm now going to tell you what we're expecting for 2026 is a highly curated, human-made photography and filmmaking that AI actually can't really replicate easily. So it's thinking about that sort of highly crafted, creative compositions. It's the close-ups, it's the unexpected angles, it's the intricate details that really showcase that human skill and those unique perspectives. But Tristan and Jacqueline, how do you see it playing out specifically in your regions?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head, Kate, in terms of the emphasis on craft. In fact, we've seen even a lot of, even in the fine art photography world, they're thinking about leaning into craft in order to face this existential crisis as we all see it sort of head on. And you're seeing also a lot of brands kind of show and emphasize the sort of slow work of photography and ways in which that makes it special and unique and distinctly human. You're also seeing, interestingly enough, particularly in the United States, like behind the scenes and that sort of storytelling of how something gets made. Like I'm thinking about Apple, who, as they did a BTS on how they made their new logo for Apple TV, and really emphasizing the work and, the thoughtfulness and the intentionality that goes into making something like that cannot be replicated by AI. I also would say, just going back to your point about the tension, though, I think we're going to continue to see this difference specifically in the Americas, because whereas, in the US and Canada, there is a lot more reticence to embrace AI-generated content and a lot of skepticism. There is a lot more appetite to embrace, that idea of AI and what prosperity is possible in LATAM and Brazil, and Latin American, Spanish-speaking Latin America, as well as Brazil. And so I think that there's a lot of excitement and enthusiasm about what is possible with AI-generated content in those markets more than North America. So that's been interesting and I think we will see that tension continue to evolve, and even probably that chasm to widen even further.
I can jump in here a little bit. It's very similar in EMEA, as varied a region as EMEA is across Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. I do think that tension we're definitely seeing between human craft versus generative AI. I think sometimes it's about machines can create, but people are creative, might be the definition between the two. When we look across the region, I do think, though, it's important to note and to be transparent that we are seeing across countries in the Middle East, specifically in conversations that we're having with customers in the United Arab Emirates or Saudi Arabia, that there's a more openness to AI and generative AI. We've seen this backed up by the consumer service that we've been carrying out over the last 12 months. However, when it comes to that question of trust, there is a unification across the region. And so still people are not very much ready yet across all of our regions in EMEA to see you as brands using generative AI. So again, I think that's reflective of the conversations we've seen where everybody appears in your audience to have an opinion on generative AI and its usage in a brand campaign. We can look at the likes of Polaroid, which has very much came out and used in its brand campaigns that it's not AI. And you've also got other brands who are really labeling that it is generative AI. And then interestingly, we have Sandra, who's one of our French-based creative insights managers, who's just been chatting with all of us as a team this week on an example from the gaming world. Sandra herself is a very avid gamer, but she's been talking about how there is a game, and I have to say I am not a gamer, but it's called Clar Obscure. So I hope to God I'm not butchering it with my Irish accent, Expedition 33. But it has won 2 awards in the Indie Game Awards. I can see Fiona enthusiastically nodding here. But for Game of the Year and Debut Game. But the awards, it appears, have been seen to be de-awarded and the trophies asked to be returned, given the fact that generative AI has been used. So it is interesting in the region of gaming that sense of generative AI and the value of where that creativity then lies, that has been applauded, is actually continuing to be discussed.
I think it's I was thinking as you were all talking about this word slop, and as a brand to be associated with the word slop is probably not anybody's aspiration in their career. So I think that will likely have an impact for proud creatives for many years to come, because none of us like to think that we are creating slop. I think the other thing that's quite interesting is how a brand, a mega brand like ChatGPT, who for most people is the de facto AI model, actually launched their first advertising campaign in 2025 and really showcased human craft and human creativity, and actually shot the campaign on film. So even went back further into the history of analog creativity. And I think that's quite telling as well. But it also kind of shows the dichotomy, I suppose, of the speed and the efficiency of using an AI model versus the slowness and the thoughtfulness that should be applied to creating visuals. Anyway, that's kind of a philosophical question that I'm sure we can ponder at a later date. But I'm going to hand over to the APAC team now. I think you've got some lovely visuals that you've been discussing. So I'll hand over to Kate and Fiona.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one very quick point to one thing that Tristan was mentioning around, again, that human craft, but specifically, Tristan, to when you're talking about that logo. And Apple also for launch, and it was actually going back nearly 2 years ago now for Chinese New Year, they did a whole campaign of how they made that particular advert all shot on the iPhone 15. So I think you're right. I think that's going to continue. We're going to continue to see that more and more of the craft behind the work that goes on. Anyway, sorry, just a quick detour, but now it's speaking to my wonderful colleague, Fiona Kwa, who is in my region and is our curation and promotion lead. And Fiona, one thing I'd love to hear about, because again, a lot of you will have access to this fabulous storyboard that the whole curation promotion team have done, which is very much about really showing the on-trend visuals that are really going to resonate with audiences today. And Fiona, specifically on this topic, obviously with AI, you, I know, have seen a lot of the shifts that we have in AI imagery, but if we're thinking about the year ahead, so for 2026, where we predict to see that stronger shift of more well-crafted, creative, original visuals, can you share a little bit of what guided your choices on the storyboard around AI?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about this today where, across all three regions, it's a lot of talk about the tension between human craft and generative AI. So my job is very easy, very difficult to pick the visuals that were the most stunning, that really showcase human craft. And I have a background in video and in filmmaking, and there's so much soul to a visual. I love everything about it, the technicality, the blood, sweat, and tears that go behind a good visual, and how it's art, how we continually infuse our experiences and our feelings into it. So through the visuals that you're seeing on stage, I just wanted to showcase that like human ingenuity through the pure craft of photography and filmmaking. So that might mean different perspectives, the perfect moment, or alternative aesthetics. So even though these themes are not unfamiliar to us, but they have a different twist that makes them feel human. I really enjoyed it, even though it was really difficult. And I think what I do throughout the year is really curate keywords, and I'd love to talk about this more later. But one of that, for my region, the APAC region, I use Choice APAC. So there I really take a look at everything that's come in every month. And then I had the pleasure of looking from January all the way to December of like, what are the visuals that really stood out to me? And I looked at my personal favorite images of the year to decide which are my favorites.
And Fiona, what would you say was because again, I think one of the big challenges is obviously we want things to be regionally relevant, but equally also work from a global standpoint. So share a little bit about, because I know you do think about this, you and the whole team, around some of the cultural and considerations that you take into account. So can you share a little bit on this particular topic of AI, what you considered?
I think for all our regions, even though we're battling, this tension once again between human craft and generative AI, I think each region thinks about AI a little differently. So for APAC, for us, it's really all about business. It's really about AI-powered prosperity, as you mentioned earlier. So similarly, I think I focus on small businesses. So if you think about the blue surfboard shoot that I featured, the surf shop really has aesthetically a very similar palette to popular AI visuals. So the blues, the magenta, kind of like that depth that seems AI-esque, for lack of a better word. But instead, even though it is aesthetically similar, it tells a really compelling personal story about a Japanese small business owner who makes his own surfboards for the love of the craft. So it's like, for me, it's like flipping it on the head, and I like having these little stories about it. For AMER, I focus more about the creativity behind it, about how it's more of a creative disruptor and lifestyle enhancer. So there's more of a bit of lifestyle visuals. Once again, scenarios which are not unfamiliar to us, but from a different perspective that's human. And then lastly, for EMEA, it's about how AI is being used as a tool. So more balanced, collaborative stuff, a couple more conceptual stuff that's more grounded. So moving on to some of the visuals that stood out for me really in the board. And first, a visual from EMEA. So this captures a Bengal cat, but we are looking at it from the bottom. And I was about to reference a video game, Jacqueline, so this is perfect. I am a video game nerd, so if you think about the video game Stray that was popular a couple of years ago, they did a lot of work into the beauty of how the cat moves. And it's a bottom-up shot of, like, if you think about like a bottom-up shot of a cat loafing on a glass bench, things that are very dear and human to us, something that's flipped on his head in a fairly professional light. And if you think about the qualities that make that a cat features, so it can be curiosity, intelligence, or agility, I think that's what I really like about this visual and what makes it stand out to me. From APAC, we have something that's behind the scenes. So we've seen a whole ton of beautiful visuals, but when we feel like we've seen everything, kind of showing things from behind the camera, it's an entirely different perspective. So much like, the red carpet shoot from the editorial year in review, the last download episode, but it showcases an entirely different perspective of what created and what came to be, the minds that helped put this shoot together. And then lastly, a visual from AMER, which I think as a filmmaker and a videographer really speaks for itself. It's a masterclass in great videography, so the salt, the pamphlets, and that really makes my heart happy, and it thrills me to look at it. That's my job, and I'm very happy to be able to look at images like these.
Lovely. Now, I think we could probably talk for hours around all of this, but Rebecca, I'm going to pass back over to you because I know we've got to go through some of the other wonderful trends that we're tracking for 2026. So I'll pass back to you on that one, but thank you, Fiona.
Thank you very much for both of you, and I think it's worth noting that as a company, we while we create images that talk about AI, we do not allow any AI generative or modified content into our collections and onto our platforms. And so there was a lot of work going on behind the scenes to check and to detect any AI modification as content comes in from our creators. What we instead focus on, and something that's very, very important to everybody from the team here today, is authenticity. Now, authenticity is one of those terms that is used so often, it kind of lacks meaning in some ways. But what we do know about authenticity is that it is the antithesis of AI generative content. It's real. And the key thing about AI generative content is that it can never be real. And so, through our VisualGPS research, we are constantly tracking, we're constantly testing content with consumers, as the team have already noted, just to kind of really understand how audiences are thinking about authenticity, whether it is something that is definable, whether it has a meaning that's slightly different from for different generations or different cultures or different countries around the world. And we're very interested, obviously, in how that evolves as time goes on and the things that are impacting that evolution. But I think the kind of central thread in all of the definitions around authenticity and the words kind of connected to it is real human interaction, relatable body language, and emotion. So authenticity does tend to be people-focused. And we've talked about, the generic and the kind of signposted imagery within the technology and AI space. And this really is much more around the personal and the individual. So before I pass over, and I'm going to pass over to Tristan to talk about how we see this evolving in 2026. I'd also like to note that there is a lot of discussion. There's a lot of media coverage around DE&I initiatives and whether businesses are still investing in DE&I, and there has been some negative coverage of brands who are pulling back on DE&I initiatives. I think we can confidently say as a business we have not seen any decline in content, inclusive content, being used by our customers. So we expected there to be a pullback on some content. We've actually seen that has maintained despite all of the swirling and the noise that's actually around DE&I, which I and the rest of the team have found to be very encouraging. So I'm going to pass over to Tristan, who does a lot of work in this space, to talk about what she's seeing and how it's evolving.
Yeah, I think that was an important reminder to our audience and everyone out there making choices about imagery that, they're in good company, that inclusion hasn't really gone away. But I want to zero in on a point, Rebecca, that you raised about, where we are in this moment. And it is about the personal, right? Like we are in this reality that, we're no longer living in a monoculture. And in fact, there are all these little fragments of experiences. There are all these little platforms that you can be present on. You can even choose to be totally offline, which are really important to people. And one of the things that is important to remember is how personal that personalizing of that definition of authenticity has become. Back in 2023, when we originally asked about this tricky definition of authenticity, especially because it had become so cliche, it was really, you could start to see that fragmentation, right? Some people defined it as something that was truthful, something that was accurate. Some people defined authenticity as something that's unique and original, and others saw it as something that was sincere and really earnest. And what's interesting is that in 2026, and this sort of began, I think, in 2025, we're going to continue to see this convergence around originality and personality and personality and uniqueness. And I think it's really related to the previous trend we covered when we think about craft and the importance to craft. People want to see visual storytelling that is really incredibly reflecting the diversity of the uniquely lived experiences that they are having, because they contain multitudes, if you will. I think it really is that this leaning into of this fragmentation that brands are going to have to do, especially because we're all existing in these kind of multitudinal worlds. At this point, when we survey consumers globally, that they believe advertising that shows a wide range of behaviors and activities and personalities actually makes them feel more connected to brands than things that are really generic, as you mentioned, Rebecca. And this is especially true for younger generations like millennials and Gen Zers. They want recognition from brands that their values and their taste, their expectations are just wildly different. It's not like the other person. And it really leans into this idea that identity isn't this fixed thing, and thus authenticity isn't this fixed thing. In fact, something else, I know a lot of cultures around the world are really collectivist. That is not the US. It's a very individualistic culture. But what was interesting is that globally, we're seeing this lean into embracing their individuality, their individual identities, which I find really fascinating. Not so fascinating for the Americas, but really fascinating to see other cultures converge around this idea of celebrating what is uniquely them. So I think that might be different from for other regions, but I will say that authenticity is something personal. If I leave you with anything, it is a lot more personal than we've ever seen it before.
Does anyone else want to chime in on that before I move on?
I'm happy to jump in. I agree with quite a bit of what Tristan has shared. Authenticity, we know, is really important when we have all of our conversations with brands across the EMEA region. I think when we think about the challenges that you face as brands joining us today, often you've got to focus on personalization and increasingly hyper personalization. I do think there is genuinely a crossover here with that drive for authenticity, because as Rebecca said at the start there, it is very much about how relatable is your visual storytelling, and ultimately the attention to detail, whether you have people in it or you don't have people in it. And I can give an example of, I've just had a lot of conversations this week and a lot of my team with travel brands. And again, if you're showing a location and the authenticity of that location matters, how much fine tuning can you do or not do, and how do you show it in a fresh way, comes down to that as well. But ultimately, I think it's coming down to, with your entire visual brand strategy, if you're a big globalization kind of storytelling you have to do, or you're working in a very specific region, it does come down to understanding what matters to that audience in those specific visual elements.
And I'll just keep my comment really short on this, because it's actually, I would say that actually Asia Pacific, we have many countries where that collectivist culture is definitely is strong. But Tristan, to the point that you made, interestingly, that there is still that demand for that higher personalization, and equally wanting to see more broadly. We saw through the research we carried out recently is that actually they do want to see a much more balanced, broader view of different types of people, of groups, of experiences in the same way. So I would say it's a very similar theme for APAC too.
Great stuff. Well, should we have a look at some content?
Yes, we shall. So I just want to give a little bit of a preface as we bring Beth into the conversation. Individuality is where authenticity is really leaning into, right? And what we asked about is, what does individuality sort of mean? And what we found from our respondents and our survey is that individuality is in the sense of their personal values, their morals, their guiding principles, but also about their life experiences. So wanting to see different sort of hobbies, different sort of personal style represented, different sort of relationships, going back to Rebecca's point about that human interaction and connection, and just really showing how that makes a person unique. And people, even if you get incredibly specific, they really are drawn to that type of imagery because it makes it stand out. So Beth, speaking of standout imagery, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you approached your curation and finding visuals that really reflected that.
Yeah, I'm seeing the curation going, and it was so fun to curate. I love seeing it up there. And I was looking for visuals, as you can hopefully see through what you're seeing now, that had a high emotional factor. They should feel fresh, vibrant, have a unique perspective, but most of all, feel distinctly personal. I was looking for imagery that conveys what life looks like now around the world. And regionally, especially in the US, it was important for those visuals to be inclusive and intersectional.
I love that. As you were looking at these visuals, what stood out to you?
I will say that what stood out for me is basically, I've got three that really just speak about hyperspecificity through human connection. It's three different ways of showing this by three different creators. The first image is a candid slice of life moment that I just love. It's this teen boy that's getting sent off to prom with a hug from his mother. It's a strong moment of connection and support. And besides that authentic feeling of emotion between them, I was drawn to the lovely texture and color. The styling is personalized. The setting is clearly small town America. It was shot in South Carolina.
I love that. And I think also speaking of inclusion, one of the things that this also speaks to is the diversity in terms of races and ethnicities, and how multiracial folks also are existing. So you see that those layers in family structures and setups. So I love that.
Exactly. For this next visual, I love that the video is in black and white. It gives it a timeless quality, but the vertical format is undeniably fresh and contemporary. It's shot in this fun and loose way. These could be friends that were vlogging for their TikTok. The hyper specificity comes through in the details. You can see one person has braces, there's these sunglasses and details in the jewelry. The creator said that the model's natural personalities guided this shoot. And you can tell that the visuals captured this dynamic rhythm. It's very spontaneous. Their joy and authentic reactions to this rickshaw ride in Bangkok, Thailand makes me smile every time I watch the clip.
Yeah, as a millennial, all this unsteadiness and imperfection and these angles, they don't work for me. I need it to be mounted.
I love it.
Steady. Okay, but I know this is where younger generations are leaning into in terms of on TikTok and Reels.
Sure.
So it really feels current and of this moment.
Yeah, and as a Gen Xer, I don't know what that says about me, that I love this so much. And oh yeah, the last image that really stood out to me is this shift. It's an extreme close-up. It's a real couple at home in Brazil. It was shot to one of our briefs. We had asked our community to show the fundamental role of physical touch in human connection and its impact on emotional well-being. Like the video before, the creator had set up the shoot to be really organic and relaxed. Their goal was to make imagery that felt natural and playful and romantic. I think this really succeeds here. The intimacy and sensory elements of this image really pulls me in. I love the way her chin is resting on the curve of her girlfriend's neck. Again, little details of their personality, their jewelry, their glasses. They're both wearing eyeglasses. The visible connection and nonverbal communication of comfort, trust, love is truly powerful.
Yeah, there's a lot of tenderness in this, and I think you're going to see a lot more of this sort of emotive, really tight, close imagery as we come into the next year.
Yeah.
Anything else, Beth?
I mean, I would just reiterate that in all these visuals, they really speak to what Rebecca had mentioned at top. They're conveying this human interaction, and they're showing relatable body language, authentic emotions, while also expressing a sense of personality and specificity.
Boom. Thank you. Well, I think this is a lot of fun. I'm going to pass it back to Rebecca for our last trend.
Thank you. Yes, we are on to the final trend, which is, as it was last year actually, is sustainability. Sustainability is something that has been a theme that we have tracked throughout the history of our company, so over 30 years now. And last year we were here talking about green hushing, and obviously we have been tracking that since, because we wanted to see in a world of green hushing how brands would visualize their environmental credentials. We actually published a report last year called Sustainability at a Crossroads, and we'll include the link to the report for those that haven't yet seen it. But what we have been doing is kind of combining what we were talking around specificity with sustainability. So we've been looking at how different countries are talking about the environment. Some countries are amplifying it much more than others. So we're taking a regional approach to how we're thinking about the environment and sustainability. And I'm going to pass over to Jackie to talk more about that, because I know that in her region there's a lot of great work happening.
Thank you, Rebecca. And I can honestly testify I'm coming up on 15 years with Getty, and the first job I worked on was around sustainability. So halfway through our 30-year legacy on this topic, but it is genuinely a very important topic. I know for most of you who have joined us here today, there are high expectations by people from all walks of life who are looking to brands to really lead when it comes to communication around sustainability. And in some ways, as we spoke about last year, really trying to ease the rise of eco-anxiety around the world as climate change to certain demographics and certain regions really becomes to be unequally felt. So when it comes to visual storytelling, let's just have a very quick reminder, because I can honestly say that we have not seen any major significant shifts in visual trends when we see what's popular with our brands and customers, both globally, when I compare to the Europeans, when I compare to our African customers, and then on to our United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabian customers. What I can honestly say is that we are still seeing the power of renewable energy. Those beautiful cinematic realism, great sweeping aerials are coming up top as most popular with most countries that we're looking at. So that story around sustainable innovation and positivity around it, and all of those kind of heavily saturated color palettes that we see that are very heavily, I think, sometimes influenced by, for those of us who are older, the popular kind of moments we had with the rise of Planet Earth and the documentary series often led by Sir David Attenborough, but it was those saturated blues and greens and little earthy browns. But where we do see some significant shifts, honestly, is looking at countries like United Arab Emirates. Most popular content there is actually really celebrating and focusing on biodiversity and nature-based solutions. So we see right up popular at the top is images that focus on the mangroves and mangrove trees in Abu Dhabi, for instance. We also interestingly see around there as well a lot more imagery that's focused on, and this is interesting, dusk or darker nighttime scenes that might be looking at logistics and kind of telling stories at a a much wider society level. We also see something similar happen in Saudi Arabia, but it does tend to focus on emerging green neighborhoods and spaces in key capitals like Riyadh. It also looks at like telling a story of sustainability, looking at heritage sites and where you might have the rise of irrigation systems and agriculture around those sites. But overall, it does tend to be very much focused between either conceptual sustainability storytelling that looks at that kind of glass globe for transparency, or all hands lifting the earth up to the sky, or it does look at quite sterile images that talk about automation, for instance, or robotics when it looks at tech innovation. So for us, what's going to be important for you when you're leaning into what your audiences really want to see, whether it's B2C, B2B, B2E, or B2G? There's so many variations out there. But I do think what continues to be important is, number one, we know that people, especially in EMEA, really want to see honesty around your visual communications. And I know for those of you, particularly in the UK market, it's very much focused on these rising advertising standards authority who really are passionate to see you as a brand communicate around your sustainability messaging, but they also want to ensure that it's done in a way that's not in some ways unintentionally misleading consumers out there who want to make better choices with your products or your services. So ultimately, we are seeing in our surveys that over 8 in 10 really want to see visuals that show the positive actions you're taking as a brand, and that really shows the relatability of that on people and communities. They also want to see where there is no action happening, the negative impacts on people and communities as well. So there's quite a bit of where you need to balance out your brand optimism with some sense of realism of how things are impacting people. We also know specifically for Europeans that the energy crisis is really key. Over 6 in 10 are telling us they've been personally impacted by the energy crisis. And we also know that different socioeconomic demographics are really explaining to us, for example, that 1 in 3 lower income households say they're experiencing a decrease in their quality of life compared to 1 in 2 higher income households. So again, as we all know, environmental health is such a key area that has an impact on how we feel, as well as how we're looking at as a brand our impact on the planet. So ultimately, here's my kind of key takeaways on this. One, I think you have to lean away from perfection and lean into telling personal stories. Bring it back to the local level. Make it more relatable. If you're looking to drive trust around sustainable storytelling, you've really got to look at empathy and you've got to look at transparency. There are ways in which you can do this that steps away not just from the cinematic way in which we see a lot of this aspirational storytelling and visuals that are popular with brands. You can think about leaning into something that Tristan mentioned earlier, but like lo-fi aesthetics, really showing that rise of joy sustainability or joyful sustainability that's trending on social media. But it's about where people are excited and they're sharing about how they've discovered a better way to recycle, reuse your product. Also, I think it's also important to understand, how do I bring equity to my visual strategy as a brand? So there are a lot of blind spots around sustainability. In order for people to feel that your storytelling around sustainability is relevant, again, you've got to look at who gets to be seen and what are the elements around those stories. So again, as we said last year, and I'm sad to say again this year, that we are seeing that overall there is a skewing towards young, white and female in terms of who gets to be seen in visuals that are most popular. We do see actually quite a few differences in the Middle East. We do see that it tends to lead with more family storytelling, and there's a little bit better gender balance in what is happening. But again, for older people, they're not necessarily always seen. Where they are seen, it tends to be in volunteer groups where they're a part of a group. It's not necessarily leaned into, as we know in some of the image testing and also some of the consumer behavior research we've done over the years, that baby boomers like to see themselves represented in the individual action that they personally take every day. And then finally, just to wrap it up, conscious of time, but given that we've spoken so much about AI, we know that there's lots of tension around artificial intelligence when it comes to sustainability. And we also know there's a lot of positivity around it as well. So we have seen, really led by countries in the Middle East, but also led quite a bit through what often can be a very cynical continent that is Europe, that people genuinely believe over 8 and 10 that AI will really bring a positive impact when it comes to the planet. And so again, it's worth checking out the World Economic Forum's report around the AI paradox. It's very specifically focusing on energy. But for all of you, I'm sure you're really looking at digital twin systems, predictive analytics. How are you going to be able to tell that in your storytelling? So I'd like to actually bring in Bex now into this. Bex has been working alongside me for the last couple of years when we look at rising to your visual challenges when you're looking to tell your sustainability stories. So Bex, curious to see what visuals you want to share with all of us that interestingly tell and lean into those subtleties that people want to see.
Yeah, I find curating for sustainability really interesting. For lack of a better word, it's evergreen, whether the evolving from the local level to community to industrial scale, it's ever kind of evolving. But that through thread we continue to see that is popular with customers is, like you said before, was the David Attenborough effect of color palettes. It's the resonance of those earthy tones, of the blues, in particular the greens. So what I find interesting when I'm looking for visuals and a way that brands can differentiate is if they kind of lean away from that color palette, look for something that's a bit more playful, something that is in contradictory to your traditional, the more tropes that you might associate around sustainability visuals.
That's great, Bex. And if you dig a little bit deeper then just into sharing some helpful visuals, I think will inspire our audiences today when it comes to that level of detail, when we're trying to bring relatability and authenticity into the storytelling.
I think detail is the perfect descriptor for the first visual I like to show. This is an image from New Zealand, and it speaks to that honesty. It feels really individual. It feels like the person's home. And as we said before, we know without visual testing, there is the individual action that is resonates most with boomers. So it's about what you can do for yourself. And what I really like about this visual is that it feels authentic. If you look at just like the dirt or the on the boots, you can see it's lived in on the pavement, on the it's tactile. There's a lot of texture happening. I love all the different elements. It feels genuine.
And regionally, if you were to expand out into other regions, Bex, do you have any other examples that might show the differences of what's resonating?
Yeah, so if we're looking at like a local level here, though, if we have with this APAC visual, if you move on to something within the Middle East, if they're looking at more of the community-led initiatives. So here, this is a library. It's all made of recycled materials. But even without that extra context that you don't know necessarily about the building itself, you still feel it within the details of the visual. It feels natural. Although there's a lot of breathability, the shadows and the light, it balances. It makes it really impactful for me in terms of it's a quick, easy read of it's sustainable, but it doesn't have to read as bright green or bright blue.
Brilliant. And then finally, I think it's worth just for everybody here today. I know a lot of you will rely on when you're trying to stretch your budget and you might be trying to use an image across multiple regions. If we look back at that conceptual approach, how can we differentiate around that, Bex, with the images that you're curating?
Yeah, without trying to repeat myself too much, but again, it's just this color palette for me when it comes to sustainability. But I think this is a great example of how you can move beyond that traditional iconography. This is about technology meets nature. There's a lot of movement in this particular image. Again, it's that tactile, it's that earthy feeling, you feel rooted to it. It feels very playful and bright. It catches your eye. And I would encourage people to lean more towards visuals that moves away from the kind of the globes. Something that is more cuts through the noise is something that resonates to me. Is this kind of shapes. It's really engaging. It teaches biodiversity. It's transformative, and transformative is kind of a through line with all sustainability.
It's a nice, interesting take, Bex, just on a shift away from when we have that lovable green shoot in the soil. It's a different way to show that rootedness of the fauna there, but also then showing that it kind of moves in kind of transformation when we think about tech innovation. So really good examples that you've shared with us. So I'm sure everyone can see that we're absolutely very enthusiastic about supporting you with solutions and inspiration around sustainability. So please do reach out and have that conversation with all of us.
Thank you, Jackie. Thank you, Bex. I'm going to hand back to Jen very briefly, but we will be back to answer questions in a moment or two.
Hi, everybody. I'm back, and welcome to today's live Q&A session. Well, we have some very chatty panelists. As you can see, we have a lot of questions coming in. So if you want to stick around, we might go over, or any questions that we don't get to, we will post later this week. Again, as you can see, we've got a full house here as we're joined by Rebecca, Tristan, Kate, Jacqueline, Bex, Fiona, and Beth to answer your questions about the creative trends they're tracking for 2026. We have over 500 of you watching today. Get that phone, guys. Welcome to you all, and thank you for being here with us today. We'd love to know where you're joining us from today, so go ahead and say hi in the chat. The floor is now open. I see a few questions already coming in, so let's get right to it. Rebecca, I have one here coming in for you. Question is, when I see the word concept on Getty on images, I assume it's AI, but are all AI pics labeled? Do you sell AI generated images? I think you touched on this before, but why don't you clarify?
I did, but I think it's worth reiterating. We do not sell any AI generated or modified images on our sites.
Perfect. Short and sweet. Fiona, I have one here for you. For the DE&I of the disabled people community, are you planning to take more and more disabled models for your photo shoots? Please. Thanks, from Dom.
Yeah, I think Dom is asking a really great question. And for us, we have a disability keyword called Disability Collection. So that's something that I help to curate every month. And we work together with the NDLA, so the National Disability Leadership Alliance. So there we look at, all the disability shoot that our team does. And then we work together with charities to make sure that it is authentic and it is properly representing the people that we want to authentically represent. Recently, our team also did a hard of hearing brief that's just been in the works, so rest assured. We are definitely planning to take more and more folks for our content.
Perfect. Thank you, Fiona. And here I have a question. I'll put this out to any of you. This is a really interesting one. Do you think companies will start embracing a not made with AI trend, like in a social justice type of way? Thoughts?
I'll take that one unless anyone has any strong thoughts, but it's already happening. I think that, a lot of TV shows and movies are now labeling the fact that it's human talent and has been created by on traditional formats. I was watching the trailer for the Odyssey movie with Matt Damon, which is supposed to be one of the big films of this year. Very exciting. And interestingly, at the end of the trailer, it actually states how the film was made, which I think is becoming more and more the reaction to AI generative content. And it's interesting because there was a lot of conversations around legislation or policy about labeling AI content. But I think we as creatives within the kind of creative community are more kind of leaning towards labeling content that is not AI. So really showcasing human creativity and human endeavor instead. So yeah, it's all. I think we will see more of that.
Great. If anyone else has anything to add, or else I have a fourth question coming in here. Jacqueline, I'm going to send this one over to you. Regarding sustainability, says my kids 22 and age 20 are opposed to AI generation due to its environmental impact. Is that an issue that brands consider as they claim to be environmentally sensitive? Good one.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one, and obviously very, very strongly topical and raises lots of passions, Jen. It's interesting because I was just listening to Irish radio this morning, and there was a lot of very particular case studies focusing on the impact of one data center in Dublin and how it's the equivalent to 200,000 households, in terms of energy usage. And then as a person, when you're listening to that, you're trying to weigh all of that out. But when it comes down to younger generations, we will have some exciting research out on generations later this year. But we do know that as more and more Gen Z enter the workplace, in particular for those of you who are really driving comms, internal comms around HR, looking at talent and recruitment, it is an important one to weigh out. It definitely becomes part of a brand value, the decision that you make on this. We ourselves here at Getty Images are not experts on, and I have to really say this, on sustainability, especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. But I do think when you're really trying to drive that trust, that really key trust with your piece of communication, you do need to bring that in as a consideration. I'm also going to open it up to Tristan, because I know Tristan would also like to add something to this.
Yeah, there's something unique in terms of conversation that's just now sort of nascent in the United States, which is about forcing AI companies to cover the costs of these expansions of their data centers to cover the energy costs. And actually, Microsoft recently announced an initiative around community first AI infrastructure. So what I think is going to be interesting is it may be less about brands itself, individual brands working in this spaces, and more about AI companies that have these large models that people are using that are requiring all this energy that Jackie is talking about, that are going to start to invest in that in order to keep the consumer demand to address the consumer demand for AI usage. So I think that is going to be interesting to also watch as this technology develops.
Great. And Jackie, by the way, I think I could listen to Irish radio all day if they have an accent like yours. Let's see. I have a question coming in. I'm going to throw this out to anyone on the curation team. What are your tips for finding and selecting visuals like the ones you've been sharing?
I'm happy to take that. I think depending on what your topic is, what it is you're looking for, there's a whole plethora of keywords that you can use, and I'm sure my colleagues can speak to that. But one of my main starting points is I actually look at our specialty collections. So whether that's Show Us or the Disability Collection, Disrupt Aging, and we also have specially curated keywords. So that would be for within Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, for example, we have Mahaba KSA and Mahaba UAE. So this is a specially curated collection that is about authentic representation within the region. We also have choice picks and choice video. So this is where our amazing creative team have pulled together to help support with what we find our most differentiated content and the most authentic representations of a plethora of subjects.
Anyone else have anything to add there from curation?
Really quickly, I'll just add, I love to use the filters on the site. Some of my favorite ones are vertical under orientation, and I love close-up and macro for the image style.
Great. All right. Well, I think that is our show for today. We are at time. Thank you, everyone watching, for submitting your questions, and answers to anything that we did not get to today will be followed up within the next week. Thanks again to our amazing panel, Rebecca, Tristan, Kate, Jackie, Bex, Fiona, and Beth. Whew. As a reminder, you can catch all past episodes of The Download on demand on our dedicated show page. If you have questions about custom content, VisualGPS, or any of our products or services, contact your Getty Images representative or email us at thedownload@gettyimages.com. For those of you on Zoom, as you exit today's session, you'll be asked to answer a few brief poll questions. So please take a moment, let us know how you like today's program and what kind of topics you'd like to see us cover on future episodes. Thank you once again for being a Getty Images customer. Again, we truly appreciate your business. I've been your host, Jennifer Kelly, and we'll see you next time on The Download.